Hello and welcome back to another episode of Only a Bag in Italy Travel Podcast. I'm Nathaniel Mellor.
And I'm Darcy Melton.
And we're going to be continuing where we left off on Wednesday, talking about your rights as an airline passenger. I'm realizing now, looking at my notes, that this is going to be a slightly larger episode than the last one, which I hopefully will also be jam-packed with information about what you can and cannot do and what you are and are not entitled to.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Very quickly, though, before we get into it, just as a brief thank you to everybody who has been leaving us reviews. We deeply appreciate it. And for those of you who have been following us on, if you'd like to follow us, you can do so on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Those are our two big platforms. Likewise, if you want to read any of our articles, you can do so on onlybag.com, where we have articles. We can also send us a message, especially if it pertains to this episode or the previous one, or any of the episodes, honestly. But if you have an experience or if you have some information you've learned or something that we did not include that you think should be included, please let us know. Last but not least, if you like what you're hearing and you want to support us financially with a donation, you can do so at ko-fi.com/onlyabag. It works a lot like PayPal, but it has a different name, I guess.
Yeah, sure.
That's pretty much it. All right, jumping straight into it. One of the big ones I wanted to mention last episode, we did not have the time to do so, was essentially delayed flights. Mm-hmm. That's a big one. I genuinely don't know. That's not true. I don't know if I've ever been on a flight that hasn't been delayed, but let's be honest. Most flights are delayed, either by a couple minutes, sometimes by half an hour. If you do use flight tools like Google Flights specifically, they have a little, when you're booking a flight, at the bottom it'll usually say something like, this flight is often delayed by 30 plus minutes, or this flight is often on time, or whatever it is. That does help. I think too, as of recording this, in the past couple months, I believe JetBlue, which is, for those of you who are not familiar, an American company, is getting fined or has gotten fined because one of their routes to JFK, which is their hub, is, I think, more often than not delayed.
Isn't it consistently late by 30 minutes?
It's so frequently late by 30 minutes that they're just essentially, you can't keep doing that. You have a slot. You're not in the slot. You're forcing other people out of the slot because you're late. So you either need to change your slot or you need to change your, something needs to change. This is ridiculous. It's also, I think, again, this is a few months old. It also might be a year old now. I'm assuming it's a few months, but time flies. I'm getting old. I don't know. I say 5 minutes ago and it was 4 days ago. But the point is, this might have happened a while ago. I realize, however, a lot of the comments I noticed were this is the first time something this has happened. Even though it's always been threatened, it's no one's actually going to go through with that. Delays in airlines are hand in hand.
It's the first time that an airline who is consistently late is receiving
getting a penalty for it.
Got it.
So I think the most important thing to know is that in the United States, there are no federal requirements for delayed flights. In the sense of, if your flight is delayed, there's no requirement anybody has to do anything for you. I believe in Europe there is. I believe you're entitled to compensation after X amount of hours delayed. I think it's 2 and 9, something like that. So if it's kind of delayed and super delayed. Interestingly, we were going to do an episode on this and never really did. But same thing on a train. If you're on Trenitalia, I believe Trenitalia. I definitely know Trenitalia for sure. I think Italo as well. But Trenitalia, if your train is delayed and there's different increments, I think 45 minutes up to 2 hours, but they will refund anywhere from a quarter of your ticket price to the entire ticket price, depending on how late you are. So it's always nice if, I think a few times we've been on a train where all of a sudden there's something on the tracks, they have to reroute us. And then they send us text messages. Hey, it's been this much delayed. If you'd like, we can refund your ticket. Hey, it's now this much delayed. If you'd like, you can refund even more of your ticket. Click here, fill out the thing, blah, 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 blah. We'll send you the money. No problem.
In fact, one thing I want to say about Trenitalia, which I think all airlines should adopt, is they have a little message that comes out in Italian and in English. Often on the trains, it says if you have any complaints about your journey with Trenitalia, please contact blah, 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 blah.
It's one of the only parts in English. I love it. I know,
but I love that they're hey, we know we make a lot of mistakes. Let us know about it. Here's the email. It's
also the voice they use for this train is running late is a normal voice. This train is running 5 minutes late. But the one they use for this train is on time, it sounds surprised. This train is on time. And I'm really? Why do you sound more surprised than I am? This is crazy. So yeah, I think it's funny. I realize this is so off topic and I apologize. Not off topic. It's very much related to travel. I just realized it's one of those things where going to anywhere in Europe, but specifically Italy, where it does have a very comprehensive train and bus system, and then going to the States, especially somebody who is not from the States, is a kind of a startlingly eye-opening thing. And I know it's only tangentially related, but we are near the Hyundai plant, the EV, the electric vehicle battery plant in Georgia. It was in the news recently for being like an ICE raid, the whole thing. But the thing that was fascinating is I remember about a year and a half ago when it was just starting, like the news had been announced, and there were a bunch of South Koreans on the Savannah subreddit asking what are the public transportation options to get there. They want to live in Savannah and then travel out there. And everyone's like, no, there aren't any. That's in the, there's nothing there. There's no Greyhound, there's no Amtrak, there's no light. I think somebody asked about a monorail or a light rail system. And everyone's like, where do you think there's a, no, this is not, like, there's no public transportation here. So I think that was, I only remember that sometimes because I realized like how going like abroad oftentimes, like anytime you go traveling, there's an often like, oh, we'll just use public transportation. And I think going to a lot of parts of the States are like, wait, there is no public transportation between those two places. Anyway, that's off topic. Jumping into the delayed flights, there are no requirements for delayed flights in the sense of they don't have to compensate you for anything. In fact, on the transportation.gov website, they felt it was necessary to add in a little part that, and I'm paraphrasing, but essentially what it says, if your flight is delayed and you really need to get somewhere, before you go ahead and just buy a new ticket on a different, same carrier, different carrier for, sooner in like just a last minute ticket, check to make sure that you are not liable to pay any cancellation fees for having missed the delayed flight. So essentially saying if your flight's delayed and you are in a desperate hurry to get somewhere, before you go ahead and buy a ticket that gets you to that place on time, make sure you're not going to have to pay that airline that is offering
Your original airline delayed your flight. Yes.
Yeah, extra money. And then that's literally, that's like their advice. And then it goes on to say essentially, if you have something like, they start with, if you are closing a lucrative business deal, if you're giving a speech or lecture, if you're visiting friends or family.
But it's like, it's all business things. And I think one of the final things is if you're going to, a family function, like a dear family function, something like that, like way low in the list, just go ahead and plan extra time.
Yeah.
Because really, and this is me paraphrasing, if you're late, it's not our fault. So plan ahead and build in extra time so that you don't miss your important function.
Which is like, it makes sense. It's totally valid advice. It's like, they call it defensive planning, which is hilarious. I'm like, I've heard defensive driving, but I've never heard defensive planning. It's just planning, but whatever. But it's also one of those things where it's essentially saying there are no protections in place. If you are delayed, that's not our fault. Not our fault, the transportation.gov, the government website. But it's not the airline's fault. If your flight's canceled, not their fault. If anything happens, no one's fault. It's your fault for honestly wanting to go to that place in the first place.
Yes, so that's what it feels like.
Yeah. So again, this is going to take a very hard slant, this entire episode and the previous one, as I'm sure you're already aware. Moving, I guess, kind of with that is domestic flights are not required to compensate passengers for delayed or canceled flights. And to that extent, they will often use weather or air traffic control. As we mentioned last episode, during the CrowdStrike cybersecurity update push, a lot of airlines at the beginning were using this is weather related. And everyone's like, it's not. In the news right now is reporting that this all has to do with CrowdStrike, not to do with the weather. However, for international flights, you can reclaim compensation. It's, again, the transportation.gov website is super vague. They're not saying that the airline has to make sure you get there. It's saying if, like, basically once you get there, you can reclaim compensation for any, like, measures taken to get to your destination, which makes it sound like airline costs, hotel costs, rental car costs, et cetera, et cetera. But again, it doesn't list these things out. It's very, very vague. It then goes to say, and if that airline won't pay, you can bring them to court and sue them. And I'm like, again, you really can't, genuinely. Like you
because the average person cannot sue Delta or United or other. I'm not targeting anybody.
Like you will run out of money before they will bring that. Like they will basically, I feel like, drown you in so many things to make sure that you just run out of money before they have to pay back for anything. It's just like, why? No, of course you're not going to sue an airline company. That is ridiculous. Which is simply to say you don't have any rights when it comes to a delayed or canceled flight. However, the good news is when you are flying to Europe, and I believe, by the way, this is the same for UK, because the UK and Europe had very, very the same as far as where airline passenger rights up until Brexit. And I'm assuming that's because if the UK website has almost identical wordage to the EU website, so I'm assuming they made it at the same time and not that they made it simultaneously, if that makes sense.
That they made it at the same time, but not simultaneously?
Sorry, I meant like they made it together.
Yes.
But they didn't separately and simultaneously make their own airline passenger rights. I think that was super confusing. So if you are, and I'm flipping through my notes here, I do apologize, but essentially, if you're flying anywhere in the EU, you're obviously entitled to EU passenger rights. So if you're flying from Paris to Rome, Barcelona to wherever, you're well, not wherever, somewhere else in the EU, you are basically entitled to those airline passenger rights. Anything arriving to the EU by an EU airline is also covered by EU passenger rights. So if you're leaving JFK, Atlanta, Washington, Newark, anything like that, and you're on an EU airline, KLM, Air France, I mean, I guess like there's Lufthansa. The reason I'm pausing too, because I'm pretty sure like Swiss Air isn't, because it's not in the EU, it doesn't fall, it has its own airline rights, but it's not an EU country, so it doesn't get the same rights. So it's a little funky, but again, UK rights is also protected. UK is the exact same wordage in the sense that if you're arriving to the UK through UK airline. So if you're going from like, as I did Charlotte to Heathrow to Rome. So because I was taking British Airways to Heathrow, I was protected the entire way through British air transport law.
Cool.
And any flight that departs the EU by EU or non-EU airline. So if you take a Delta flight or that's a very loud wrinkle of paper. If you take a Delta flight or anything like that from Rome, for example, back home, you are protected by EU transportation rights. So if your flight let's say in Rome is delayed or canceled, then you can get compensated from Delta because you are covered by those EU laws. Or if you need a hotel room, et cetera, you are good, you are covered.
Okay, I have a question.
Okay.
Actually, I have a statement that I want clarified, and then I have a question.
Love it.
So you essentially, of all of these options, there's an option where you're not entitled to any coverage, and that is if you are taking an American airline to Europe. So Delta, for instance, to Europe, you would not be covered by any of the EU airline passenger rights, correct?
The only thing you're covered by is the Montreal Convention. So if you miss your flight's later, more importantly, if your flight's missed, like not missed, like if it's canceled. Delayed is good luck getting any money out of Delta for that or any other company. Again, we fly Delta, to be clear, by the way, so that's why we're using Delta as a placeholder. We have not flown United in years. I flew American once, and it was a disaster. So we just use Delta as a placeholder because who we fly. It's also they're the ones who've been in the news so frequently. They're also the ones who came out with that sort of threat, for lack of a better word. Like not threat, but they're the ones that basically we're changing our tickets seating around. So now for a very basic economy ticket, you are not guaranteed to sit next to the person that you are booking with.
Super messed
unless you are, going to do. I'm pretty sure they're the first company to roll that one out. They're also the one playing around with AI pricing, which is essentially like if they think you as a consumer will pay more for a ticket, they will show you only those higher prices. So it's no longer everybody who's getting an economy ticket is paying the same price. It's from your search history. We've noticed.
So predatory.
I know. Like we've noticed you've been paying more for certain things, so you're willing to pay more for a ticket. So they're going to try to roll out like specific to your cookies, your computer, your IP address, whatever it is, that you'd be willing to pay more, or that you have more expensive taste when it comes to certain things, but you don't necessarily have those expensive tastes when it comes to flights. They're like, well, we're going to still charge you $1,000 for a $600 ticket. Anyway. This is Delta, y'all.
That's not a thing that's happening, right? That's a proposal.
That is a thing that they are attempting to roll. Like they're basically flirting with the idea of rolling out.
Okay.
They're in the stages of experimenting with this tool to see if it's something that they can roll out.
Okay.
Sort of like how Wendy's did that. Wendy's is an American fast food company. For those of you who don't know, they did surge pricing essentially. Right. So essentially, it was like if it's
it did not go well for them.
No, because they also didn't do the opposite, which was if it's at 2 a.m. and you want chicken nuggets and nobody's at Wendy's, they're not giving it to you for like 8 cents. Mm-hmm. They're going to charge you still. It's like it only goes more expensive. It didn't go cheaper. And I think Delta's the same way. It's not like, hey, we noticed that you're always like budgeting really tightly, and
It also never benefits the people who work for that company.
No, God no.
It only benefits the larger corporation.
Yeah.
So
that's fine.
If I'm taking an American airline to the EU, I'm protected only by the Montreal Convention.
Yes.
The word convention, not by the EU passenger rights.
Yes.
So you mentioned earlier, basically, whenever you leave, if I'm leaving Rome, for instance, I'm leaving anywhere in the EU on an American airline to the US, I am protected through the EU passenger rights.
Correct.
If I have a return flight, so essentially if I'm leaving the US, going to Italy, having a fun little vacation in Italy, leaving Italy back to the US. And that's all on Delta, for instance. Does it matter that my initial journey began in the US, or is it anytime my flight leaves from Rome, for instance, that's protected?
Anytime your flight leaves from anywhere in the EU, it's protected.
Okay, it doesn't matter where your initial journey began.
Exactly. So it's basically saying otherwise it would create two tiers of passengers.
Yes.
Right. The one that's like you're protected because you're on a European flight, and you're not protected because you're not on a European flight. It also protects because you and I are having this conversation around American airlines, but what about an airline out of a different country?
Canada.
Yeah, exactly. Or
Australia.
I was thinking, Australia, because they had similar rules to the United States, or like, I don't know, South Africa. I don't know what South Africa's airline flights are, but like, so now all of a sudden you're requiring somebody behind the desk to know the difference between what American passengers get versus South Africa passengers, between Chinese passengers, between Australian, so it's like, I think they're just like, if you leave here on any flight at all, you're just, you're covered. We will put you up, and on the airline's expense, like we will charge it to the airline. Here is where, if I may, using your example, let's say you're American, because again, this is for Americans, and you're coming from, I don't know, middle America, right? Because there are very few flights, right? Especially like maybe right now there's a St. Paul to Rome flight direct. I think St. Paul to Naples as well. But there are very few flights from middle America to Europe, simply just for distances more than anything else. So let's say you're coming from Boise, Idaho, which honestly might not be middle America. That might actually technically be more west than I'm thinking, but you get the point.
Okay.
And then you fly through, let's just say Newark, and then you go to Rome, for example. Your flight, let's say you booked it. Went to the Air France website. You're like, I listened to the Only a Bag podcast, love them, great advice, and then I'm going to go through the Air France website to book my ticket. As far as I'm aware, because Air France obviously just the way airlines work, no airline company that's not belonging to that country can operate within that country. So they can operate flights out to or into the country. So like French airlines can go into America and out of America, but they can't go domestically in America.
Right.
It's sort of an anti-competition sort of thing, or anti-competition. Yeah, you know what I'm saying. But you get it. Same thing in Europe. So the difficulty though does become, if you are flying from Boise to Newark, let's just say, you cannot fly Air France. You are going to be on Delta because that's their partner. I don't believe, if there's an issue in Boise, if you're delayed or late, I don't think you're entitled to any compensation because your next leg is domestic.
Okay.
It's not until you're leaving Newark on an Air France flight that you'd actually be entitled to anything. And again, you might be able to go through the Air France website and say, here's the thing, I booked it through you guys. But I'm not entirely sure, because Air France might be like, we don't want to take the loss on that. We have no way of regrouping that money from Delta. So we can't really do much about it. I say that because I really could not find any information that said if you book through, specifically, by the way, through, I'm saying booking through Air France because Air France, Delta, KLM, they're all in the same group. Well, what are they like? Not Star Alliance. They're the other ones. There's a One World, Star Alliance, and somewhere else. They all have these fun names. Sky Team.
Yes.
They're all through Sky Team. So my understanding, though, is if it's in the American, like you're still have to be covered by the American passenger rights, which are none.
Right.
Which is just, it's a bit of a thing. There's also, I wanted to briefly mention, it used to be more of a thing. You sounded very, very surprised by it, so I figured I'd mention it anyway. It's just the fact that it used to be a little more common that if you were like on a Delta flight, for instance, and it was delayed and you really need to get somewhere, you could go to the United desk and say, hey, can I like swap this ticket for United ticket? And then they could sometimes say, yes, you can, for sure. We have an agreement with Delta, no worries. Or we have this little, ticket swap thing. Obviously there's no law that states that has to happen. It's just simply some airlines would do that. I don't, clearly judging by your surprise, I can't imagine.
Yeah, I had no idea that was a thing that you could do.
I feel like I've done it a couple of times, but again, not I personally, my family has done that a couple of times when I flew with them. So, but I can't imagine this happened recently. It has not happened to you and I recently, that's for sure. So I only mention that because that is not a rule. The other thing I wanted to mention is something I learned through, pain, is that when I missed my flight, so I explained in the last episode, I had this ridiculous thing where I was like, had a flight from Charlotte. It was super late, ended up being canceled. I was able to get super lucky going back to Rome. They were able to book me on a flight to Heathrow and then to Rome. When I arrived at Heathrow, I found out that my next flight to Rome was canceled. Hilarious for everybody involved. And it was a nightmare. I mean, not an actual nightmare, it just sucked enormously for like 12 hours. And I went to all these different sort of help desks because it was one of those things where it was like, someone thought like my flight was Iberia because I had Iberia on the thing. Then it wasn't. That was just an ad or something on the boarding. It was that in itself was ridiculous. This guy was really trying to help me. He was so sweet. He was like, no, go to the Iberia desk. He's like, there's nobody there. You should go to Iberia. Now Iberia was so confused I was there. They're like, no, they're just letting you know that Iberia is like one of the people in the Star Alliance. Yeah, like that's not an Iberia flight. We don't even do that. Like we'd have to put you, it was a whole thing. But the point is, I go all the way through the British Airways desk because that was what the flight was on British. And I finally get there. And after, this woman's giving me all the options. You can go here, you can go here. I can book you to a 1 a.m. flight through Athens, Greece, and then a 3 a.m. flight back to Rome. I can do this. And then when she got to the final stage, she's like, oh, wait, you bought your ticket through American. We can't help you here. You have to go to the American desk. You have to go, which is like, different terminal, by the way, like not remotely close, back to where I arrived. And she's like, you have to go talk to them. At this point, it's like 10 o'clock at night. They're about to close the desk. And she's like, because they have to rebook you. We can't do it here. I go to the American desk. She was super confused. She's like, no, why would it work like that? That's ridiculous. We didn't cancel your flight. British canceled your flight. Go to British desk. I go to the British desk. I explain. I'm like, not in tears, but like whatever the sort of I haven't slept for 48 hours equivalent of I'm in tears is, the sort of like, please, I will go anywhere. I will go anywhere that isn't Heathrow Airport at this point. And actually got incredibly helpful. And I mentioned the last episode, everybody has always seemed to be helpful anytime there's an emergency in an airport with me. And he was like, yeah, no, I don't, you're fine. I can rebook you. That's not a problem. And you don't have to go through Athens. That's ridiculous. There's a flight in the morning if you want. And it's like, right, but I can't stay here. He's like, no, you can. We can put you up in a hotel. And I was like, what do you mean? He's explaining this whole thing. So this is where, again, part of my interest came is that not only under UK laws do they put you up in a hotel, they were adamant that they will put you up in a hotel. And the guy was like, there's another guy later who was, I found out, by the way, they're out of hotels, hilariously. And he was like, no, you're good. He's like, as long as it's under a couple hundred a night, I think it was like 400 a night or something like that, you are completely covered. Just keep the receipt, send it to this thing, you're fine. And thankfully, I was not the only person. Like there was so many people who were on these canceled flights to America. There's 5 or 6 canceled flights to America. Some people who didn't have a leave date for 3 or 4 days. And they were, again, somewhat fortunate because basically the people were like, no, like British Airways will cover your 3-day stay here. Like I think it was food up to £50 and then 300 or 400 euros for 300 or 400 pounds for a room
per night
or per day with the food. Yeah. So with the food was not great, but the night, the stay was fine. Some people were like, oh, we'll just do it in town. Which is all simply to say, what I learned from that is if your flight is canceled, you have to go to the desk that canceled the flight. If you're on a Air France, it's Air France desk, not Delta. If you're on a whatever, you have to go to the desk that canceled the flight, not where you bought the ticket from. Even if you get pushback on that, it seemed to be more of a legal thing of no, we have like, that's not one of those details that vary airline to airline. That's more about whoever actually said you can't get on our plane because we know how long of a plane is responsible for you and putting you on the next plane, which is all simply to say if you're in this situation as well, and you know, like I knew pretty much getting off, my flight was canceled, and I walk all past these desks to get basically towards the gate because I was like, oh, the closer I get to the gate, the better kind of thing. I didn't realize I have to go back through security, so I was thinking I'd just go to the check-in, my check-in gate at whatever it was, the gate number thing, and there's a desk, and I was like, oh, maybe they'll rebook me there. I didn't realize I couldn't even get there without it because now my ticket was expired, so I couldn't even get through. It was a whole ridiculous thing. So simply to say, if your plane is canceled in at least Europe and the UK, definitely go to whoever canceled you. In the same thing in the United States, but again, you have no actual protection, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
So I think for me personally, that is all the notes I have had on that. The other thing we wanted to talk about is what Darcy sort of likes to call Facebooking, but it is in fact called FaceBoarding.
FaceBoarding, which is a silly name, mostly because they use it all over the EU, right? Or is it just in Italy?
I honestly think it's just the 2 airports in Italy. I mean, it's all over the EU is trying to roll this out, though.
Yes, but yes. But I think it's silly that it's in English.
Ah, I see what you're saying. Yes, it is, isn't it?
Yes, right? Okay. So I find that absurd. That aside, this thing is called FaceBoarding, and
I know they can't use Facebooking, by the way, but you're booking a flight with your face. So I'm like, how is it not Facebooking? Sorry, I know it's protected. It's just that really does slightly annoy me.
yes. So this is all related to something that I mentioned last week whenever I was talking. We were talking again last week about flights, and I was talking about facial recognition in airports. And we'll get into that just a slight bit more in a moment. But as I was sort of researching your rights around that, I found that on September 11th of this year, just recently, it was basically a privacy watchdog group called Garante, which is based in Italy, basically was like, hey, there's a problem with this thing happening. So in two airports in Italy, they are trying out this FaceBoarding situation.
In the Milan Linate, which by the way is not their, it's not MXP, which is their Malpensa, which is their major airport. It's their, I want to say it's an older and smaller airport that's not as used as frequently. Also, Catania's airport.
That's the other one. Yes, thank you. So, Nathaniel, can you explain briefly what FaceBoarding is? Because it's not the same, as I said, as just the facial recognition.
My understanding from what I read is it's a new attempt to essentially it was just to remove a lot of pain points in an airport. But when you check in for your flight at the airport at the kiosk, there's gonna be these little kiosks that you check in. It's supposed to use facial recognition, take a picture of your face, and then your identity document and your boarding pass. So essentially, it links your face to your document to your boarding pass. And then throughout the airport, you no longer have to show your identity document or your boarding pass to anybody because you are being tracked through the airport, is the idea, is my understanding of how this works. Rather, so you can't like switch off, like once it's been checked in, you can't just switch off to somebody else and then have them go through. Because the idea is you are tracked through the airport. And then that way you can get on your flight without having to go through the sort of like the three other passport and boarding pass checks. You'll still have to go through security, I believe. But on especially like Italy to Italy or Italy to other parts in EU where security is like walking through a metal detector and that's it. Just, I mean, I don't know, just promise you didn't bring anything bad on board. It's just very lax in comparison. I do think that it's essentially supposed to streamline the sort of, I mean, to probably the point of, and my understanding when I read about it a year or two ago is that it's even supposed to go once you've been registered, sort of like, I didn't understand, but the TSA pre-check and global entry, part of it is the exchange was you pay money and you give them your biometric data, your face and this and that, and the fingerprints and all that for, not for free. You paid them to take it. And then it was supposed to speed you through. Right. That was the kind of exchange. Like, I promise I'm up to no bad. Here's all my information. But now I think that's what's causing a problem is people are just taking it anyway. Like all these companies, like, we'll just take it anyway.
Right.
Without like you having agreed to it through TSA pre-check and global entry. And the idea is though, even in future flights, like we can go back 6 months and be like, oh yeah, you were on a flight 6 months ago. We saw you. You still look like you still have the same. And right now it's facial recognition. Eventually it'll be gait recognition, things like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that way the idea, I mean, again, in a perfect, beautiful world where nothing wrong ever happens, you walk in the airport with a ticket and you don't have to talk to anybody. You go straight to your gate, you get on board just as you would like on a train, or maybe not a train. That's a bad example because trains, sometimes you have to check your ticket, but like a bus where you just get on board a bus and go to another country and nobody like stops you and really cares in Europe, for example.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is, but of course this isn't a perfect world, and Garante has found out that maybe people should not be in charge of your.
That's exactly it. There is major concern that people are going to misuse this data, and that people shouldn't be tracked as heavily as this system is tracking people. So Garante has basically put a stop to the use of this in the Milan Linate airport temporarily.
Interesting too. They are, because they're a nonpartisan group, but they are also. I didn't also realize that they were able, because I thought it was like they're a government body, kind of, in the sense of they are a government body, but they're also, I thought it was an advisory body, but they are actually allowed to levy fines against companies. And in fact, they have done so. ChatGPT, OpenAI, TikTok, and a few others, basically. And I'm wondering if those of you might not have heard, in Italy recently passed the first, in Europe, the first law that sort of curtails some of the way that AI can be used, right, and sort of levies fines and prison time against misusing AI, which is, as you can imagine, very open-ended.
Yes.
in terms of what that might mean. But again, a lot of Italian laws, I think, are like that, where it's kind of left up to the judge and the lawyers, not necessarily the legal, not like the people writing the law necessarily. It's more about like the judges to get into the nitty gritty of like, what do you think is misusing it?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say, for sure.
So with this, I think it seems like a similar aspect where except they're basically pausing because like you're going above and beyond. You're going too much.
Exactly. And so speaking of all of the facial recognition, so as I mentioned again, like last week, whenever you enter, I would say almost any airport, it seems, any major airport in the EU. I'm thinking like I came through Rome whenever I came back to Italy recently. There, whenever you go through customs at the end, when you're entering Italy, you go through something where you put your little passport in a scanner, and then you go into like a little stall,
Yeah.
and it takes a picture. This machine takes a picture of your face, and essentially, so that happens. I feel in a lot of places in the EU. It also is in, I think, more than 80 airports, 80 or 88 airports, lots of airports in the US is this facial recognition system. A lot of the time, I think even when I was coming from Atlanta to get onto the plane, there was a facial recognition. I got my photo taken so many times. So ideally, and on paper, you can opt out of this. Weirdly, it seems easier to opt out of in the US. So if you do not want to have your photo taken, like if you don't want facial recognition to happen to your face, you can tell somebody, like if you're at the gate, there will be a gate agent next to that machine that is going to take your photo. You can tell that gate agent, hey, I would like to opt out of this. They should say, all right, no problem. I'm going to do the check manually, because that is what they have done for a very long time. There have been instances of pushback. There have been instances of sometimes gate agents saying, like, we already have all your information anyway.
TSA agents.
TSA, but also no, gate agents.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Sorry.
people just at the gate, just as you're getting on the flight.
Is that also where the facial? Mm-hmm. Oh, good to know.
I have not encountered a facial recognition at a security of like a TSA point.
Because coming into the country is, I know that's the only thing I'm familiar at, is where we come into the States, for example, and say, where have you been? Where were you there? Did you bring any food with you? They ask you to look at that little camera, and it says next to it, if you'd like to opt out of the picture, you can, and we'll do a manual check instead.
Yes.
Okay.
I think that is customs.
Okay, sure. I was thinking passport control, but yeah.
Yeah, and passport control. Yes, and whenever I left Naples, I also had to do facial recognition going into my little international gate. So when you're in the U.S., whoever you're talking to, whether it's TSA, security, gate agent, any of those people, you should be able to tell them, like, hello, I would like to opt out. Sometimes they will push back, but you have legally the right to say, I'm opting out of this, because it is voluntary. When you do facial recognition, that is a voluntary thing you're offering to do, technically. In the EU, weirdly, it seems a bit harder to opt out of, and part of that is just my own experience of seeing not a lot of airport personnel around the what's it called, the customs, and where these machines are, passport control. There aren't that many people physically working in these spaces, so it's kind of hard to get the attention of someone to say, hello, I'd like to opt out of this.
Especially when you're hundreds of people getting off a flight, or multiple flights getting at the same time, so you're hundreds of people arriving at the same time, and you're finding the one haggard airport worker who's just like making sure the machines don't go down.
Yes, exactly. So it seems to, like many things, it's easier said than done, but across the board, this is technically a quote-unquote voluntary thing that you are doing. Facial recognition in airports is voluntary at the moment. So you should be able to opt out. It doesn't always work, practically.
And I think, a lot of the articles I was reading, whether it's like, I don't know, I was going to quote some articles, but they're all kind of the same, like Reuters or Tech Cutter, Cord something? Anyway, all those like the tech ones, or the sort of regular article, like companies that write articles. I'm making this sound terrible, but essentially a lot of them had the same angle of like, why should you opt out? Or what is here's why you should opt out, rather, is how they were all written. And a lot of them is simply the fact that like, it's information you're giving away that if it not ever gets out, but it's essentially like more things linked to you makes it really difficult to, or makes it much easier to steal identity, makes it easier to sell you things you don't want, makes it easier to take, it's just little things like that, apparently. I say apparently because, I don't know, or it's like when the DMV loses your, all your social security numbers because they've had it backed up on like a floppy disk. It's kind of
Right.
like, oh, okay. So that maybe you guys don't get the social security numbers anymore. I don't know what to tell you. So it's a little,
I
yeah.
think my thing too is that of course, I want to be trusting, but I don't trust corporations and things that are holding this data. So essentially, a lot of places that use the data, you look facial recognition and biometric data, as far as airports go and things like that, they claim that they don't hold on to that information, except in some instances, like this is written
Where they
out,
definitely
where
do.
they definitely hold on to it for training or for this or for that. So there are all these kind of
It's also, especially for those of you listening on American, TSA claims they only hold up to Americans' photo for up to 12 hours, but if you're not American, indefinitely, including if you're a permanent resident, indefinitely.
Thank you for mentioning that. So, if you are an EU resident going, I believe this is specifically into the US, I don't have information for other countries. If you're an EU citizen going into the US, number one, be careful. It's wild right now. They might not let you in. Things are crazy. However, Americans going into the US can opt out of the facial recognition. So, in some instances, EU citizens will not be allowed to opt out. It may be mandatory for you.
Yeah, it makes okay. So they're
Again,
basically
I
saying
don't really know
you
what
can
that
volunteer to
means.
do it, or you can leave.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So just watch out for that if you're from the EU going to the US.
Or I imagine anywhere going to the U.S.
Yeah. Yes, for sure.
I just
Yes.
assume you're listening to this from the EU. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, too, and that's with a lot of these, if you happen to be going to the U.S., as you've noticed, we've been focusing a lot of Americans going to Italy, obviously. But as we've explained, like you have very little protections in the United States, just as anybody traveling around the United States, leaving the United States to go back home if you're not from the United States. And if I may segue into like, what can you do? On one hand, straight up, if you're American, you can absolutely, call your senator, congressperson. You can be like, hey, can we like get some pushing happening? Because I feel like this is one of those issues that isn't necessarily political. Like it's just like how are we not all
Right.
protected by
Absolutely.
so like essentially because I mean these are quite wide. They affect everybody. Anybody
There
who's
was, in
flying
fact,
to go
a
anything.
bipartisan bill. I don't have the specifics on it, but there was a bipartisan bill in the recent past of two government officials saying, like, hey, this is not cool. We should not be forcing facial recognition on anybody in airports, and it should not become recommended. Basically, like this is a slippery slope situation.
Yeah, to everything, and I think because that's the same thing. I may also say this too because that's a big part of like everyone talks about like why they don't like China, and China has facial recognition everywhere, and it's like right, but like, isn't that what we're also allowing to happen everywhere else? And I say it too because you mentioned, I think we mentioned at some point in this episode that Europe does have some fairly strong privacy things from how does it like to protect people from corporations.
Right.
However, as a whole, Europe has some pretty dicey relationships between governments having access to people's data, if that makes sense. So something like this is if it's the government has access to your facial recognition or whatever it is, they're less likely to want to give that up. They don't really necessarily want corporations to have it, but when it comes to them, they're like, no, we're responsible with it.
Right.
So it's a little bit thing. However, so things you can do, actually call your local politician and say, hey, I would like, please reinvigorate this idea. Please reinvest in this idea. Make something happen. The other thing is, and this again, the tinfoil hat goes back on because in America, it's a huge industry. Obviously, credit cards, specifically ones that offer travel insurances. Not as big in Europe, where a lot of these things that credit cards offer, such as if your flight's delayed, we'll reimburse you. If your flight's canceled, we'll reimburse you. We'll get you a hotel room, et cetera, don't happen in Europe on the credit cards because they aren't necessary. So, of course, my tinfoil hat says like, man, these credit card companies are really making a killing off of like other people signing up for credit cards in order to have these sort of protections. However, that being said, these are, if you are coming to Europe and you don't necessarily aren't taking the path of using credit card, it could be an option. Obviously, not a financial advisor. Don't take financial advice from somebody like me, but it is something where you get price drop protection with some of them. You do get, if your flight's canceled, if flight's delayed, if there's something, an emergency comes up, you have to cancel your flight, they'll reimburse you to a certain point. They're all different. You have to look into them. And then last but not least, travel insurance. That's literally what this is there for. That's also for Europeans as well, not just for Americans. There is obviously for Europeans, there's travel insurance going to the States, going anywhere else in Europe that if something does happen, and if you're not, you want it to be covered quicker, or if you want to be able to call somebody and actually get somebody on the phone, that's another big thing. Sometimes, as I was waiting for the British Airways, I was dumbfounded that people were on the phone with British Airways versus when the American flight was canceled, and everyone's like, there's a laugh track. I don't understand. There's no one answering. So these are things you can do. Travel insurance, credit cards that have really strong travel protections, or simply, as we mentioned, if you're just like, I just like things going right, then making sure you get to a hub where a EU flight is flying out of. And I think largely, genuinely, I felt like this myself when I was at this sort of odyssey across the ocean. It's like 3 flights. My God, it was not that long, but it just, it sucked at the time. But it's like you become the statistic for a day, like, yeah, all the little article about how, oh, these passengers just had a tough time for a little bit. That was it. It didn't like ruin my trip. I just felt really happy when I finally got to where I was going. And part of it, I was coming back here, but as you found, I missed the first night at the hotel, which meant like if I was coming here for vacation, that's a lot worse. That's like if I didn't check in and I missed this and I did, it's just,
of course.
So those are the kind of things that do kind of break down on this. However, there are ways to protect you, as mentioned. So if you are coming soon, or if you're coming at all, you're going to be pretty protected if you're just aware of it. I think that's the other thing. Just assume nothing and assume that airlines, well, not assume, but just know that American Airlines do not have to protect you in any way or help you in any way. Just so they do so with the kindness of their heart type of thing. And especially if it's a gate agent, desk agent, something like that, customer service agent who is just like doing what they can to help you. That is just, give them a high five. Say thank you so much.
They're doing their best.
They're doing their best. Yeah. So I think that's all I have.
Me too.
Lengthy episode.
That's some good info, I hope.
I hope so too. Well, and I appreciate you all for listening. Thank you all so much.
Yes, and if you have any info on any of the things that we've talked about in these last 2 episodes, please let us know. If you have any questions about your upcoming trip, you can reach out to us about that as well at onlyabag.com.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening. Tanti abbracci.